Howdy. Have you ever heard someone say, I listen to everything except country? Oh, you've said that yourself? Yeah, you're all really special. Anyway, there's a big movement brewing right now, and I bet you listen to more country or folk-influenced music than you might think. Now, the intertwining of country and folk with alternative music has been a thing since the beginning of rock. After all, they share the same ancestor, the blues. So it's not that surprising. Lots of people even refer to OG country artists like Johnny Cash or Hank Williams Sr. as some of the first rock stars, mostly due to their innovative breakthroughs in the field of abusing amphetamines and serial adultery. Even into the 90s, outside of the actual country music that was big at the time, the biggest alternative music movement was grunge. If you think about it, grunge has a lot of similarities to country music. Just listen to basically any Pearl Jam song and tell me that guy doesn't have some major twang in his thing. Eddie Vedder spent most of his life on the West Coast. I bet his city slicker ass has never even had to cut off a chicken's head with an axe on a stump. What a fucking poser.
Grunge vocals across many artists like Stone Temple Pilots, Alice in Chains, and even Nirvana feature some major southern-sounding elements. Lots of the instrumentals resemble country too. Even with the heavier stuff of that era, artists like Rob Zombie and Texas's Pantera were fusing alternative heavy music with southern-sounding elements, and it was a style that ended up being very recognizable and influential. This became even more apparent years later with artists like Creed and Nickelback, where the country influence was so obvious that anyone with an untrained ear could recognize it.
Rockstar. That's pretty much a country song. Photograph. It's pretty much a country song.
Then there was the whole Kid Rock thing where it was heavy but also had a really southern thing going on, even if it was mainly just in the aesthetics. The point is, this isn't new.
But recently, this whole thing has been picking up a lot more steam in different ways, and changing form into something that goes much deeper than just genres influencing each other. People who have never considered themselves fans of modern country music, like chronically online music nerds, are starting to embrace artists like Zach Bryan, Colter Wall, and Tyler Childers, who are taking a much more stripped-back, raw approach to their music, rather than the poppy frat country stars of the past decade. It really makes me think of the same way that hair metal was killed off by grunge in the 90s. A super commercial and mainstream genre, backed by big labels, a hyper-curated and masculine image engineered to attract both men and teenage girls, all with a very predictable songwriting structure that references the same few things over and over again. In the same way that grunge killed hair metal, Zach Bryan, the guy who did this,
Heading south,
is killing off Luke Bryan, the guy who did this.
Country girl, shake it for me.
Right after grunge blew up, hair metal bands immediately started putting out grunge tracks to cash in, except they weren't very good because they were already old and late. But there isn't an equivalent to this yet for the alternative, except for the fact that MGK just covered a Zach Bryan song. Wait, what the f***?
But it gets more nuanced than internet kids suddenly taking to one or two country artists. Country, folk, and southern aesthetics have been infiltrating their turf for a while now. Artists like Pinegrove and Alex G, although you'll probably at first associate them with indie or some light-in-the-loafer shit like that, are completely soaked in folk influence. These are some of the most mainstay popular artists among alt kids and chronically online music fans right now, and they have been for years. But their folk influences sometimes get overlooked due to the mix of other genres that get blended in. One of the most major examples of a folk artist who is loved by many in the alternative crowd is Adrienne Lenker, whose introspective and modern take on folk songwriting in both her solo work and with her band Big Thief have been popular for quite some time, even more so recently on TikTok. Also, Show Me the Body has a banjo in it. There are lots of artists that are emerging with a sound that seems more like a pure fusion of country and other alternative genres, such as Wednesday, Howdy, Villager, and a lot more.
Some people have even thrown around the term country gaze to describe the sound. Wait, that gives me an idea. And what about someone like Ethel Cain? She's arguably the main figurehead for this movement, mostly because of her southern Midwestern aesthetic and the religiously charged themes of her songwriting more so than the sound of her music.
And if we take a step back and look at Lana Del Rey, I think she's got something to do with all of this. Her Southern Belle Americana aesthetics have been seeping their way into the subconscious of D-tier level art hosts for over 10 years now. Her actual music doesn't have much country influence yet. Her first country album, Lasso, is scheduled to come out later this year. For someone like Lana Del Rey to write a full-blown country album after being one of the absolute cornerstones of alt-girl music for so long is undeniable evidence of a cultural shift in that direction.
I said, welcome Nashville to Hollywood, and Hollywood welcome Nashville because the music business is gone country. And then the next week, we had 3 major artists announce big country albums.
It's really not that shocking, though. Even for her last tour, she purposefully avoided New York and LA, and instead went to West Virginia, Missouri, and Alabama. Both Ethel Cain and Lana's popularity and driving influence on this movement really go to show the legitimacy of this impending shift in the alternative world. It's crucial to note the impact of their aesthetics and songwriting themes alone, outside of the sonic elements of their music. The aesthetics are arguably even a bit more of a driving force behind this shift, and zooming out, it looks like it's affecting our entire culture.
The art world has been appropriating redneck and working class aesthetics since forever, but instead of tilling the fields and waking up at the crack of dawn to make sure the livestock are fed, they're LARPing about having a trad wife with a sundress on Twitter, and getting mad at Nora Smith for making homemade cereal on TikTok. Of course, it's not a one-to-one ripoff. You'll see these southern aesthetics infused with things like the latest praying shirt, people's Japanese denim from Grailed, or disorders. This has created a whole new aesthetic that people are calling, you guessed it, y'alternative.
However, this melding of cultures actually goes both ways. There exists an inversion of this phenomenon, which is actually the truest and most legitimate form of alternative. After all, alt kids exist in the South too. Sierra Farrell, who has 2.5 million listeners on Spotify, is an interesting example. Her musical style is entirely country and folk, but her aesthetic, with her face tat, septum piercing, and whimsical style, is, at the very least, alternative presenting considering her niche. She might not be getting attention from femcels per se, but at least the Southern gals who lost a family member to the fentanyl crisis have a musical alternative to Suicide Boys. As for those kids, they're a much different breed than the yuppies we were talking about before. Vice magazine, when discussing the term y'alternative, described the movement as being one part appreciation for where you grew up and one part reclaiming something that rejected you. Think about it from the perspective of today's Southern alt kids. A lot of them grew up on the internet, which was usually weird and f***ed up no matter where you're from if you spent enough time on it.
Peter, what are you doing? Crack? What the f***?
Except for a lot of them, the people and culture surrounding them in their day-to-day lives slowly became directly antithetical to their own values and interests that they might have picked up over the years from being exposed to lots of different ideas, music, and aesthetics on the internet. Basically, it became a lot easier to grow up into the black sheep of your family or community in the South in the 2000s and 2010s. If you were growing up into a chronically online alt kid in the South or in the rural Midwest, it was much more likely that you became more isolated and felt a lot different from the people that were surrounding you.
But now, these kids are grown up and becoming more confident in their identities, and reclaiming the parts of their Southern culture that they're most proud of, while still being their alternative online selves. And it's a huge part of the reason why y'alternative is becoming such a big thing, and manifesting in all facets of culture, whether it be music, fashion, aesthetics, or values. If the idea of being the black sheep of your town because no one gets your niche funny internet humor resonates with you, go to neopunkxm.com. We have something for you there.
If you think being chronically online means you're always fishing, you might be alternative. If you look at a John Wayne movie and say, he's literally me, you might be alternative. If your idea of a good time is co-opting the status symbols of the small town culture you came from and also rejected you during your most vulnerable teenage years, you might be alternative.
Neopunk FM.